Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Dan Hanford. This podcast is unlike any other podcast you have been listening to. The guests on this show are true, active real estate investors closing real multifamily deals. Whether you are an active investor looking to up your game or a passive investor looking to learn more about how multifamily deals are structured, I promise you will thoroughly enjoy this podcast. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll be notified of future episodes. For those of you that are interested in investing passively in these types of deals, in solid, cash-flowing multifamily deals throughout the Southeast, then visit my group, PassiveInvesting.com. Fill out the investor interest form. That's PassiveInvesting.com. If you've closed a multifamily deal in the past 12 months and want to be on this podcast, then send an email to Stacy@multifamilyinvestornation.com for details. Now let's get started.
Welcome to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Elkins Hutton, the Director of Investor Education here at PassiveInvesting.com. And today we have Elijah Brown. Elijah, welcome to the show.
Whitney, thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Well, Elijah, I know we have an amazing property to talk about here today. Ethos of Kinderman, 13 units in Avondale, Arizona. But before we get into those details, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into multifamily, and where you're at today.
Sure. So I actually got started while I was still in college. I got my best friend and my cousin together. We went out and bought a single family property, put a tenant in. We loved the process. So we did it over and over and over again, scaling into multifamily. I got my coworkers involved and a few investors, and we had a bunch of deals go full cycle. We just kept buying more and then partnering with larger companies to get into larger deals. And today we are mostly passive investors, but we focus on what's called a fund structure where we partner with other passive investors in a separate LLC, and then we deploy those funds into deals that we like. So that's what our focus is today.
Are you a passive investor looking to diversify your portfolio? The team at PassiveInvesting.com is thrilled to introduce the investment opportunity of our real estate debt fund. This debt fund places first position loans on rehab projects sourced by our private lending company called Rehab Wallet. Since we started this debt fund in June of 2020, we have funded over $260 million in loans to borrowers across the United States. As a limited partner investing alongside PassiveInvesting.com, you can be part of the success of Rehab Wallet. With a minimum investment of $25,000, you can seize the opportunity to earn a preferred return of 6 to 8% with a 90-day liquidity option to call your capital back. Our real estate fund has been a great investment for our investors to have a short-term or rainy-day cash reserve with a high-yield return option. Don't miss out on this chance to enhance your portfolio and your financial future. Visit PassiveInvesting.com to discover more about this real estate debt fund and start your journey towards a prosperous investment today. That's PassiveInvesting.com.
Awesome. So are you guys actually operating the deal that we're going to talk about today?
We are. That was one of my last actively managed lead GP deals.
Awesome. I'm so excited about that because I think, and maybe we can save this part of the conversation for later in the show, but what is that transition point, right? But before we get into that, I don't want to spill the beans. Let's not get into that right now. Let's talk about this deal. Okay. So we've got Ethos of Kinderman, 13 units, Avondale, Arizona. We were talking before the show. I mean, we're both a fan of Arizona, but I'm sure that'll come out during how you found the deal. So let's talk about that. You closed last July. So let's back up the timeline a little bit. How did you find this deal?
Believe it or not, it was on LoopNet, in the LoopNet graveyard where all multifamily properties that nobody wants go to die. We found it there and nobody wanted to take on the project because it required a very heavy lift. It was an older building, but it was surrounded by really nice buildings in a really great neighborhood. And my alarms went off and said, this is a good opportunity for value add and raising the quality of the building to meet the area.
Awesome. Okay. And so let's walk through that process. So you see it on LoopNet. what was the first step that you did? I mean, do you just reach out to the broker that had listed it? Like, say, hey, we want to take a look.
We have a representative broker that we work with, and we had her obtain the rent roll and the profit and loss. Those are the two things that I really need, along with some images, to be able to underwrite a property or do an initial analysis on it. I then plug the numbers into my custom Excel model, which you guys can actually download at goldhawk.us/model. If the numbers make sense in that first pass, then we go a little deeper into our due diligence process.
Okay. So you get the information, or you see this unique opportunity, kind of a heavy lift building. It's on the graveyard of websites, LoopNet. Hopefully nobody from LoopNet is listening here. But
no, LoopNet's great.
I've heard it called that too. But anyway, so you see this, you approach the seller, you get the necessary documents, you enter it in your spreadsheet, and you're like, hey, this might actually work. So at what point in time did you decide to put in LOI? And did you actually walk the property before you put in your LOI?
No. So usually I'll make sure the numbers work. I'll have someone from my team walk the property, including the broker, take videos and photos and give me their honest opinions. If the numbers look really great, I'll go ahead and put that thing under contract or under LOI before I even see it. So that's something was putting in a lot of offers on properties. And so it didn't make sense for me to be traveling out. And I don't physically live in Arizona. And so I was flying out to see these properties. It didn't make sense for me to see one before even putting in an LOI.
And guys, we were talking before the show. For those of you who can see us on video, Elijah lives in a Sprinter van. So that is not his office behind him. So you can do this from the road.
I'll give them a little taste. You can see, turn the background off. I'm literally in my van. Spent 2 years building it out.
Awesome. Okay. So back to the deal. You got this under LOI. Was there any other competition here?
I don't think there was a lot of competition. We'll never truly know like how many other offers were submitted, but the fact that it had been sitting on LoopNet for multiple months told me that there weren't a ton of offers.
Okay. So limited competition, you get it under LOI. When do you go out to the property?
At first, I didn't. I had the inspector go through. We used Marty from Inspect It First in Arizona. I had him go through with the broker, with a guy on my team who helps me with some underwriting and a few others that we know in the area. They walked the whole thing, did a full inspection, and then reported the results back to me. At which point I had to make a decision whether or not I wanted to go forward with that project. I will back up and say I had contractors walk the property as well. I didn't want to physically go out there and see it without having essentially a scope of work ballpark in my hands to know, okay, it's going to cost me this much money to renovate. I waited until I had the whole team go out and due diligence for me.
Okay. So is this before or after you had the purchase sale agreement signed?
So after the LOI, we then had the purchase agreement signed before we did the inspections and the due diligence.
Okay. And then how many days did you have for this due diligence?
I believe this was a shorter one. So I think we had about 2 weeks worth of due diligence where we had to go out and inspect the property. At this point, I actually saw the property. I went out there, walked around, took a video for my investors because I was raising equity and debt to close on the deal. I needed to physically inspect and then also provide some type of footage.
Okay, so you had a short time period. Was it like 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah, the due diligence period was about 2 weeks. We had about 30 days to close. So typically, if you're going to be submitting offers that are less than asking or with terms that are more favorable to the buyer, you're often required to give in on other things. For example, close on a shorter time frame. So a lot of the deals we've done have actually been just cash offers with 2-week closings, just because that was what allowed us to get in at a solid basis.
Awesome. Okay. You're getting into due diligence, the physical due diligence. What kind of surprises were there?
This was an old building. There were a lot of issues. And what's funny is most of the issues didn't actually present themselves until we ripped the walls off. So we'll get into that. I mean, the list of issues from the inspection was pretty big. Literally everything had to be redone. The pipes, the electricals, the roof, almost everything. We actually ended up negotiating almost $100,000 cash credit at closing to cover these issues that were discovered during the inspection process.
Okay. So what did you put it under contract for? And then what did you end up closing at?
Yeah. So 2.15 million. And then we ended up with a net $75,000 credit.
Okay. And so you asked for 100, but you only got 75?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I think we asked for like 150.
Okay. Let's talk about the earnest money deposit, because that always seems to be a puzzle piece. So how did you guys handle that?
Well, in different deals, it's different. Sometimes we'll go non-refundable hard from the beginning. I hate doing that. That's like one of my rules now is to never do that. But essentially, the way it works is you've got a certain number of days to inspect. So in this case, we had like, I think 14 days or so. Once that period's over, you've got a certain number of days to submit a BINSR, the buyer's inspection notice, essentially saying, I'm not happy with the property as is. I want some type of discount. And we call that a retrade. And it can have a bad negative connotation because no seller wants to deal with buyers who retrade. And so usually you want to get everything wrapped up within the original offer and purchase and sale. You want to do as much research as you can before, but things happen. Things come up all the time. And so we like to make sure that we're covered in negotiating the appropriate credits. And once you have agreed on something, that earnest money becomes non-refundable. You have essentially waived that. That's gone. You are now what's called going hard into the deal, which means you're not going to get your money back. It's a dead deal cost. And so that's what happened. We got our $75,000 credit and we went hard on our earnest money.
And how much did you put down for earnest?
I think it was like $30,000.
$30,000. Okay. What was your business plan for this deal? It sounds like a pretty deep value add.
Yeah. And that's one thing we got really good at in Phoenix, Arizona was heavy value add. And that's thanks to our relationship with our contractors. And what's interesting is our contractors are probably more expensive than most contractors in that market. But that's because they do a really good job. And on a property where we're talking about raising rents almost $500, you really need to. That means you're going to be doing a lot of work. And essentially, we ripped this property down to its studs and redid almost everything. We ended up spending $1 million. Well, we're still in process. It's not over yet. We're spending $1 million as of right now on only 13 units. And that's $77,000 a unit, which is on average. That includes exterior stuff as well. That's a lot of money. Usually you wouldn't spend that much. I think most people spend $25,000 to $30,000 per unit on average. And we're spending more than double that for our quality of product.
All right. Okay. So let's talk about the financial side of things, because this had to pencil out for you. So let's talk about the financial due diligence. And I also want to kind of tease out what you saw in the initial underwriting and then incorporating things in from the inspection. What made you still think that this is like an amazing deal? So let's start with the due diligence piece and then let's talk about the model a little bit.
It was the difference between what they were collecting in rent and what we knew we could get. Rents on average were under $1,000. They were collecting $985 a month on average. And we knew that those units were worth $1,500 or more per month. That's over $500, which is over a 50% increase in rents, which is insane. We knew that we could spend a lot of money to bring the property up to the standard that it needed to be, but also, have enough spread in there to make a profit as well. The other thing I will note that we didn't discuss on the acquisition is that this was a 1031 exchange. I was taking money from other properties that we had sold and essentially using that cash instead of paying taxes on that capital gain right away. I was reinvesting that money into this deal so that I could defer those capital gains. And so this is a longer term hold. We're going into it a little bit less levered. This is a project where we want to actually get it right and hold on to it for a long term. We're not just trying to do, a builder grade, crappy quality renovation, put tenants in there and get rid of it. This is a longer term hold. So we want to do a good job. And that's why we were willing to spend $1 million to make it look nice and have the right structural and mechanical components as well.
So are you completely vacating the units in order to complete the rehab?
As the leases turn, we renovate units. So we started with the exterior because we figured once the first few units become available for rent after renovation, we want the place to look nice so that we can attract the higher level of tenant that's going to pay $1,500. And so we did the exterior first, and now we are renovating units as the leases expire. We've done half of them at this point, and we're working on the second half right now.
Are you a serious real estate investor looking to break into the multifamily space? Or are you an experienced multifamily investor looking to level up your game by meeting new passive investors and creating new partnerships? Have you heard of the MFIN Con happening in Charlotte, North Carolina, June 12th through the 14th? The Multifamily Investor Nation Convention is a place to learn from over 60 plus high-level speakers and also to network with over 700 serious multifamily investors. If that's not enough for you, A-Rod. Yes, Alex Rodriguez, 12-time Major League Baseball All-Star with over $700 million of commercial real estate, including apartments, will be live and in person speaking at this event. Also speaking is the one and only Dr. Robert Cialdini, the godfather of influence and the award-winning author of the book Influence, one of my all-time favorite business books. Finally, we will have the CEO of Taco Bell, Mark King, joining us on stage to talk about leadership. Be sure to secure your tickets to this live in-person event as the tickets are going fast. Go to mfincon.com to find out more details. There are also sponsorship opportunities available for those of you who would like to have a booth at this event. For the details for this event and to purchase tickets, visit mfincon.com. You can use promo code MFIN Podcast, all one word, MFIN Podcast, to get $200 off tickets, and that's mfincon.com. Look forward to seeing you there.
Let's talk about the debt, because my question here is, did you need stabilization in order to acquire the debt? Like, you knew you were going to be vacating units, doing this large rehab. What kind of debt did you put on this property?
We've used all kinds of different debt in the past. On this one, we made a relationship with a private lender. And this was one of the reasons why we are able to do this and not be in fear of floating rate, high leverage bridge debt right now that a lot of sponsors are in trouble with. And so we negotiated with our private lender. He financed a good portion, I think 65% of it at an 8% interest only, plus all the renovations, 100% of the renovations. So we got a great deal. And one thing to note with private money, you're not working with a bureaucratic bank with all kinds of processes and rigid regulations. It's more of just a phone call conversation with the lender to discuss the situation and essentially work together to make the property successful. And so, this was the first deal where I've accepted private money on for debt, and it's working out quite well.
Awesome. Did he have any prepayment penalties, lockout periods, anything like that?
No, none of that, but it is a full recourse. So and along with my partner, we personally sign our names on it.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. And then what's the term of the debt?
Yeah. So the initial period's 18 months, but that's another great thing about private money is they don't want you to give the property back to them. They want to work with you to ensure that the property is successful. So we've built into our loan agreement the options to extend for a longer period of time, including worst case scenarios where we may need to lower the interest rate or come up with some other type of creative strategy for getting through a period of economic downturn without defaulting on the note.
All right. So you raised capital on this deal. So how much did you put, from the private lender, and then how much did you raise? Yeah.
So we got about $800,000 worth of our own equity out of 2 1031 exchanges. So we sold 2 properties. We got that money, and then the rest of it came from the lender. I'm trying to pull up my calculator here. And so we borrowed about $1.3 or $1.4 million from the lender, plus the renovations.
Okay. So you really only had 2 investors in the deal, correct?
Correct. So we had the 2 entities that owned those previous properties, but within those entities, we had multiple investors. So entity number 1 had about 10 investors, and entity number 2 had 4. What
kind of terms did you offer the limited partner investors in those entities?
For this deal and for all the deals, we try to target around a 15% IRR within the hold period. And for this, we just underwrote based on a 5-year hold period, even though we might hold for 7 to 10 years, depending on what we want to do. It's a 1031 exchange, so it's a tax strategy. We're trying to defer our capital gains and cash flow on this property for a little while before we go to sell it. The target was a 15% IRR. with some of the renovation overages, we're probably reforecasting down to around a 14%. And then cash on cash is closer to a 5% on the projection.
Okay. And did you offer a preferred return to your investors?
Yes. So essentially the investors, they get 8% return on their money before we start to promote, which in this case is a 30% of the profits after that preferred return. Yeah.
Okay. And did you structure any fees into this deal?
It's interesting when you're managing a 1031 exchange, you have to be careful with some of the rules about charging fees. I don't want to get into this because I'm not really an attorney or a tax attorney. However, we are not charging asset management fees. And that's something sponsors should actually take note of. When you're in a market, in a deal that does not have significant amounts of cash flow, whether that's because of the market environment or the property that you're dealing with, one way to not bleed more of that cash flow is to not charge an asset management fee. We don't have an asset management fee. We did not charge an acquisition fee up front. That was one of the stipulations from our private lender. He said, I'll lend you all this money, but you're not going to charge a fee up front. I was like, that's okay with me. I'll take the loan. We're going to make all of our money on this off the back end. In addition to our own personal capital being invested, I have a significant amount of money invested in this deal as well. So I'm making money as a limited partner as well.
Awesome. All right. You already alluded to this. Let's take a little gander at takeover. So, this is a question that sometimes I ask, you hope to uncover all the surprises during due diligence period.
Oh, man.
But you close on the deal.
Impossible.
We've heard it all. But I have a feeling you have some interesting stories to tell. So let's talk about the first couple months after takeover. What were some surprises there?
Some surprises were we thought we were going to have to only replace a small portion of the plumbing. We ended up having to replace all of it. It's so bad. We thought we were only going to have to replace a small portion of the electrical, including one or two boxes. We have to do all of it.
We weren't galvanized plumbing and not do the electrical?
Yes. Yeah, it was not good. Issues like that. There were actually some structural issues with the decks, like the balconies that were coming out. So those had to be reinforced. There is a stairway that goes up to a second level with a balcony. That whole thing the balcony had to be redone. So there was just a lot of issues. Another thing we weren't expecting was our contractors came to us with a paint bid that was 3 or 4 times what it should have cost. And so we had to kind of scramble to find another third-party contractor to do the painting for us. And trying to coordinate that additional contractor with our other contractors was difficult. You got to understand, the general contractor wants to control everything. And when you bring in someone else, it can create a lot of tension. And typically they don't want to work together to try to figure that out. And so they end up either causing issues or not getting the work done and then blaming the owner. It all rolls downhill to us, Goldhawk Capital, as the owners. Everybody will say, it's your fault, your fault, your fault. Nobody will take responsibility. So me and my investors are the ones who suffer for that. So
unfortunately, having owned active real estate myself, I'm well aware of that piece. I do have a question for you because you discovered a lot of these things after takeover, the physical obsolescence of the building. How did that play into your insurance? Because there should have been some sort of review of the property for you to gain insurance.
Yeah, actually, the insurance was really not an issue. The insurance people, they come out and they inspect, they look at what they're going to look at, but they're not spending multiple days of the property with the contractors going through every little issue. They're not looking at really looking at the scope of work. It's kind of funny. They just kind of send someone out there to check a box. And sometimes they find something and most of the time they don't. Most of the time they actually don't care. They'll just issue the policy and they won't even come out and check.
Kind of in wrapping up here, Elijah, what was something that you thought was going to be easier during this transaction that ended up being harder? And then conversely, what was something that you thought would be more of a challenge that actually ended up being simpler or easier?
Sure. Well, definitely managing the renovations. That was the biggest issue on this. Raising the capital was the easiest part, which is so odd because raising capital is always such a struggle. But raising capital is easy because we had a capital from the other deal. The really difficult part was the change orders on the renovation. For those listening who don't know what a change order is, you've got your original scope of work from the contractors that says this project's going to cost $800,000. It was supposed to be like $850 originally. And then as soon as you close on the property, they go back in and they spend 3 days putting together a list of things that they didn't get before. And then the change orders start rolling in. You're like, wow, we're 1 month into this project and we're already $100,000 over budget. Like, what am I going to do? So trying to deal with that and really determine, are we going to keep renovating all these units, or are we just going to like stop now and try to sell the building? That was a very difficult thing to deal with, but we are moving ahead forward. The other question, something that we thought would be hard, but that was actually very simple. I think property management. So property management is always so difficult. I have been through maybe like 7 or 8 managers that have just like caused me to pull my hair out. Managing a manager is a very active process. There's nothing passive about having a property manager. However, we discovered this company called Zendor. They're in Phoenix, and our property manager, Megan, has just been incredible. She was sent from the heavens to help us. And that has been just like incredible because she is always available. The communication is top notch. She's great at placing tenants and processing applications and dealing with tenant issues. And that's so rare to find within the property management world.
Awesome. We had a question on the table from the beginning of the show, and we didn't fill in the blanks here. And now that you've told the story on this property, is this the reason why you're now doing Fund to Funds?
You know what? It's part of it. The main reason is because my lifestyle has changed. We've had 9 deals go full cycle, averaging anywhere from a 30 to 100% IRR. So I can't take credit. The market was very hot when I was investing in these deals as the active partner. And so my girlfriend and I decided to make a lifestyle change. We said, we've got a little bit of money that we've made from these properties. Let's like focus on creating memories and enjoying our life. So we decided to travel full time, and we built out a Mercedes Sprinter van. And with that comes a lot of change. I can't be actively managing renovations. I can't be driving for dollars and getting dinner with brokers. And so my strategy has changed from actively doing these deals to now playing one part very well, which is making relationships and underwriting and essentially just raising capital for good opportunities. And so that's what I'm focused on right now. The other part of it is, I don't want to deal with that stuff anymore. It was not fun. I worked really hard and it worked out, but like I would rather focus on what I'm good at.
It's always refreshing whenever you finally realize that about yourself. And there are some people that love doing that. There's a handful of people that are like, give me that building. I want to do that all the time. I love that. And then, there's those of us that you take a few licks and you're like, you know what? I'm good.
Right.
I'm good. Let's try something else.
I'd rather be a quiet investor.
Exactly. Well, Elijah, thank you so much for spending your time here with us, giving us your knowledge and expertise, sharing your story about this deal. Where can people find out more about you?
The best way is to add me and shoot me a message on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com/in/Elijah W. Brown. You can find me there. I post 3 times a week or more with something valuable in the real estate world. So please add me on there.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you, Elijah. We look forward to having you on and discussing future deals.
Whitney, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast. I trust you enjoyed this episode. Take a moment right now to leave us a review and let us know what you learned. Also, don't forget to visit passiveinvesting.com and fill out the investor interest form to invest alongside me in excellent multifamily assets located across the Southeast. That's passiveinvesting.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.